Wish you were one of those influencers with raving fans who binge on your every word, consume all your content, buy everything you have to sell, and demand even more? Then stay tuned while Authority Magazine columnist and BuzzFeed contributor Tracy Hazzard shares strategies, tips, and tactics from top videocasters, podcasters, authors, and social influencers on creating that bingeable factor. Now, let's join Tracy as she explores how to rise above all the digital noise with the binge factor.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Binge Factor. I'm Tracy Hazzard and I interview cool podcasters who are really doing this for a long time so that you can learn some success tips about how to keep going in your podcast. And one of the interesting trends I've seen is that since the pandemic started, religion and spirituality category is growing faster than all the other categories, number one. Number two, it has way more episodes than all the other categories. Now, that's very logical reason. One, it's got a lot of churches who are running podcasts. So they're recording their sermons, their depending on the type of religion, right? It could be a synagogue, it could be a church, it could be any type of religious service. They could be broadcasting that service and then saving it and sharing it in a podcast. So some of them are daily. So there's large numbers of shows. So if you've been doing this since the pandemic, 3 years later, you've got over 1,000 episodes. Or if you've been just doing it on your weekly sermon, then maybe it's only once a week. But there are lots of others that are commentaries on religion and spirituality. And that's the host I have for you today. And I was so glad when he was introduced to me because I just really wanted to cover this topic area that we haven't done very much before. We do a lot more in the spirituality space, but not as much in the religion space. And I think this is really interesting. So I've got Joseph Rockey Jr. for you today. Currently, Joe runs and operates Elite Business Conversations, a specialty coaching and consulting firm that helps individuals and companies create elite sales cycles, immaculate and enduring business cultures, and succession plans for business owners who are ready to pass the torch. But in 2017, Joe co-founded the podcast Father and Joe. Father and Joe brings people together by exploring the relationships we have with ourselves, the relationships we have with others, all under the umbrella of the relationship we have with God. He's the author of the international sales book, Casino Sales Master, Winning Strategies to Beat the Odds in Sales and Life. I'm going to have to ask him about that because that seems incongruous with a spirituality and religious podcast, but we'll have to find out more. Casino Sales Master teaches how Joe went into economic sales environments that guaranteed failure and came out a big winner, despite having limited monetary resources. The skills taught permeate so much deeper than the realm of sales that they'll enhance every reader's life in an unfathomably positive way. And that's actually about his podcast too. It's so profound in its thought. His co-host is Father Boniface Hicks. And the two of them together have such a wonderful conversational style. You really must listen to this show and understand how to do this type of co-hosted podcast conversation. Do it in this interesting way. May really work well for your business, for your goals, for your mission in the world. But a podcast that definitely has impact is what they're doing today. So I'm so excited to bring you Father and Joe, Joseph Rockey Jr., the co-host, along with Father Boniface Hicks. Although Father's not here, he's a little bit busy. So we're just going to talk to Joe today. So let's go to my conversation with Joe. Joe, I am so excited to have you here to talk about Father and Joe, but also to talk about your business and the way you work and why. And this is my first question here. Why did you decide not to do a business podcast, but to do something so deeply personal?
Yeah, so for those that remember, and I know that this was a long time ago, in this country, that transition from Obama to Trump was not awesome. To say the least. Basically, the country was dividing itself into either you were in this category or you were in that category. and you were not allowed to talk to the other team. And one of the things of growing up through life is I've always liked history. And any society or civilization, whatever you want to call it, that has donned this approach of dividing yourself into groups and not being willing to communicate with the other side, that has always ended in one of three ways. Either A, there's a massive genocide, which is really just a one-sided civil war. B, there's a civil war. Or C, they go to war with someone else. That's always what happens when you go down this road in totality. So I didn't like any of those options. And my thought process was, what can I do about this? And that was when I reached out to Father Boniface Hicks, who's my co-host. And at the time, he was in charge of a radio station that was syndicated in God knows how many places, a lot of the country. It's called We Are One Body Radio. And I basically pitched him this idea, originally thinking that it would be a content for his show, and it had grown into its own podcast overall. This was in 2017 when we started. The original contact I had with him was the Saturday after Thanksgiving of 16. I distinctly remember it. I was walking around outside in a snowstorm in Pittsburgh on the phone with him, being cold, trying to make my thoughts clear to have a conversation with him. But that's really what started. Was I see the potential of a massive problem. I see people getting elected by making this problem worse. And I want to do something to try to combat it, because I don't want to live in a world that's going to end up with America having a civil war or going to a full-fledged Armageddon style thing that has been, prognosticated for the last 50 years through the Cold War. So I don't like any of those answers, and I wanted to try to do something about it. And that's what I do in essentially every aspect of my life. I take a shot. We're going to see if it works, and we're going to go from there.
Well, I'm so glad you did. And I think you must have been onto something in your thinking, because there's a tipping point that I noticed. And this is why I invited you on my show when you came across my desk. And I was like, oh, I have to have him on the show, because I saw recently the tipping between true crime as being the highest category of podcasts in the podcasting industry to being religion and spirituality as a category, and that it had grown tremendously. And where I saw it happening is if you look from 2020 to 2023, because of the pandemic as well. So I think you combine those two things, that shift in our culture especially in 2016, but even before that, and then that shift in our culture again here in 2020, you start to see this as more and more of these shows. But what surprised me was the number of episodes that are in the religion and spirituality category. There's so much to choose from that you could deep dive into. And your show is no exception. As we're recording this, you've done 340 episodes. Amazing. And there are so many different topics that you cover in that. How do you decide what you're going to talk about?
So we have had essentially the same ground rules from the beginning. Any thought that I have, we basically are allowed to talk about, and he can convert it, because Father Boniface Hicks is the expert of experts when it comes to teaching the Christian faith. In terms of the Vatican, which is essentially the disseminator of the information, he's the number 2 person in terms of training priests in the English language worldwide. So if you speak English, he probably wrote a great part of the text that you are using, as far as the backing of what it is.
He looks way too young for that.
He is.
Yeah.
He is part of I guess walking as much as he does. But yeah, no, he's incredibly knowledgeable. He has been on tour talking forever, and like I said, there's a reason people want to hear him. He knows so much. And part of what the appeal from his side of doing this show was, he's a PhD of PhDs, and how to bring it to regular conversations beyond his practice of what the Benedictine monks do at his monastery, which is spiritual guidance for individuals as they come in. And part of this was designed to be essentially me willing to be public with my spiritual questions. So when Putin started to invade the Ukraine, I was torn and conflicted, because on the one hand, I know this war's happening because Putin is insane, period. It's a fact. On the other hand, it's a religion of life. You can't just root for someone to assassinate someone. So how do you deal with this crossover?
How do we reconcile that as Christians, or or of the
Exactly.
Jewish faith, or whatever it is? Yeah, how do we do that? It's difficult. I normally save and don't hit the binge factor so early on, but this is what I want to point out to all of you listeners out there. This is Father and Joe's binge factor. The fact that Joe here is being vulnerable and saying, hey, I'm feeling stressed in the world. This is going on, and I don't know how to reconcile that with my ethics, with my humanity, with my religious beliefs. I don't know how to do that. Can you help me with that? It's on-air counseling, but it's not just personal, because Father is putting it in context, giving
Mhm.
you a context for where you can draw on what you learned. Probably learned in Catholic school I went to, so I learned that. And I'm like, oh, I heard that story before. Now I'm putting it into practice. And so there's so much of that, combining what's really happening in practice in your world, then applying those deep teaching principles that come from Christianity and come from our faith, and pulling them together. That makes you want to go back and say, well, I'm still struggling with this, and I'm still struggling with that. And is there an episode on it? And there sure enough will be, because you have 340. So
Yeah.
I can see that's the binge factor to the show, is you doing that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things that we try to accomplish, that themes that go through. Obviously, there's themes of the content, but one of the practical things that I wanted to make sure that came across with it, and hopefully you get in each episode, but you certainly will get it across a series of them, is that this is applicable into your life. This isn't just a theory that I can do this inside my head, because if you if you're not going to get something out of it, why would you go through it? I mean, let's face it, following the rules of really any religion are hard, and most of our society is guiding towards not doing it. If there's not a payout or a benefit, most people will check out at the door. And so many of the things that we point out here, people are able to implement in their lives, and they get better. And really, it's because the basis of the show is all about the relationship you have with yourself, the relationship that you share with others, and then all underneath the umbrella of the relationship you have with God. And really, strengthening any of those three has a magnifier effect on the other two. It's one of the great things that people don't realize. And to give a quick analogy here of kind of what I'm talking about, think of your base personality as water. And like any other thing with water, it's going to go to the lowest point. A lot of people have this false thought that I can compartmentalize, especially with men. I can compartmentalize, and I can be the worst driver in the world. I will cut through traffic. I will blare on my horn, and I will slam my brakes and whatever. If I can get an extra 3 inches, I'm going to do it. But when I get to work, I make fair but accurate calls when it comes time to disciplining my employees. And then I am the world's greatest father. Well, the reality is you're going to sink to the lowest point. And that's inevitably what happens with all of us. So really, you end up becoming someone your kids don't want to be around, and someone that all my employees are looking to work somewhere else, and I can't figure out why. And what we do here at Father and
If you
Joe
move
is
the line somewhere, it moves everywhere, is what I always say. So I agree with
that's
that.
it.
Yeah, it's like if you're going to move the line in your personal life, and that's a reflection on that. If you're going to move the line in your personal life, it's going to bleed over into your professional life. It just happens.
That's exactly it. And as you grow in a facet, it will bring everything else up. And to your point before about the spirituality genre in general increasing in the podcasting space, I believe the fundamental reason behind all of that, and inevitably with any podcasting, the ones that will survive, are the ones that are based on truth. So many of us looked around, especially during COVID, as you mentioned, this is when it started, and we just saw the rules of how we're supposed to measure things change sometimes within the same newscast. Um, and if you remember when the thing first started, it's the most contagious, deadliest thing on the planet, and it got here 6 months ago. Well, if that's a true statement, I would already be dead. And that was my first thought of it whenever we were shutting down March Madness. And then we just saw the rules change and weaken every 10 seconds.
Yeah.
And you can only be lied to so long before you desire truth. That's an element of people. And I think that that's why this space is growing so much, because at its core, regardless of what even religion you're talking about, your goal is to find truth, and essentially you're going to find love in the process. But the goal is always to find truth. And that's why I believe, as a starting point, it's so desirable for an audience, because you're getting truth. And I
Well,
think
it's
that
really
that's
hard
something
to
really cool.
maintain artifice 340 episodes in. Like, it's just
Well,
impossible. You can't do it.
I think that's the difference between knowing you're actually telling the truth and trying to come up with stuff.
Yeah, exactly, right? It would be too difficult. You would have quit, right? It's too
Yeah.
hard, right? And I think that's actually, and to my point about true crime being, now losing its position, true crime's a whole lot harder. You have to script the whole thing. You have to research the whole thing. Religion and spirituality, we can sit and talk. Like, it's a
Mhm.
little bit easier, right? And there is a bunch of fodder out there in the market, in society, for us to talk about. So it's not also hard to come up with a topic. Maybe, how we angle it and what we want to talk about is different, but that's really easier to sustain than something that is completely artificial.
Yes. And on that note, we'll do one episode a week. So when it comes up for coming into context, what we're going to talk about, I don't really just like kind of make it up as I'm walking in the door.
You
As
thought
with
about it.
I also do a YouTube show that I did every day. And there were times I figured out when I was on the air what we were going to talk about. With Father and Joe,
The
that was
ideas are
never the
getting
case.
filed away. I can see it.
Well, exactly. I mean, there's only so many times you can call the offensive coordinator horrible and show it on tape without having a new way of saying it. That's probably why I stopped doing that show, quite frankly. But when we look at it, this is something that when we do Father and Joe, it is well thought out, at least from me bringing the question of intelligence. And with Father, like I said, he basically already knows anything. I have tried to get answers out, try to come up with a question that would throw him off, and I've never done it. And like I said, I've had a lot of different attempts of how to do things and whatnot. As I bring that up, we've been doing this for 6 years. Not only did the technology that we use greatly improve, the actual ability of presenting the content has improved. And that's why I tell people I greatly appreciate anyone who wants to go out and binge it. But start at, I believe it's about episode 95. It's where we started the Virtue series. I think that's really when we figured out what we were doing. And that would have been about a year and a half in or so as we were recording it. I just think it became a lot better content at that point compared to what we were doing at the beginning. And not to say what we were doing at the beginning was poor or bad. It's just night and day since then. And a lot of people have gotten the most out of the Virtue series as itself. And I believe that was about 7 episodes as it was anyways. And like I said, it's around 95 or so. So there's still plenty of episodes to get from us after that fact, about 250.
Well, you know what I think is really an interesting model of podcast to look at, and what you've built here is that there's such a rich library. But this is the hard thing about podcasting, is that the search engine is so bad that it makes it difficult if someone like you isn't sitting there going, "Hey, I think you should go back to 95," right? It's hard for us to navigate that. And that's why I think we end up with people who just binge listen because they're like, "I don't know where the good stuff is. I'm sure it's in here. I'm getting something right here. So I'm going to go back to the beginning and listen to the whole thing, and I'll figure out where the good stuff is." I'm willing to invest my time in that because I'm finding something that's giving back to me. And on that give back side, when did you start hearing feedback from your audience? And how do you feel when you get that?
Almost immediately. He's kind of a celebrity in his space. So when it came out, there was a lot of, another way to get content from father. And so that was great. It's like, cool, we have a starting point, a little base here. And it just kind of grew. He would do in passing, bringing it up when he's doing a keynote address
Good
somewhere.
for him.
Yeah. And then next, boom, I'm getting spikes. One of the first places that blew me away that we had a seat in was Tokyo. And I was like, well, he just did a convention over there and told everyone about it, like right as we were starting. And it has just, taken off. And it blew me away when that has happened. So
around the world, there you
go.
It
really is. And it's like I said, it's one of these things that people just want to hear the truth. It's not a sales gimmick. It's not this, that, or the other. It's the way that it is. And in my opinion, at least, I think we talk more about people in the way that it is as people dealing in our reality than we do with the actual Bible or anything like that, because we're always trying to tie it to pragmatic today. What can I do? What is the benefit? What happens if I don't do this? And stuff like that. So it's a very pragmatically driven show. And I think that's because that's how I am. And that's why I wanted to make.
So back to this other thought that had occurred to me as I was listening, I was like, why don't you have a business podcast? Because if this is how you're doing and sort of your personal impact on the world, what could you be doing in the business impact? And I know we're going to talk, you've got a book coming out and you've got a coaching class and you do have a business. So why not a podcast for that business?
The reason I don't have a podcast for the business is actually, I didn't know this at the time. I didn't even know I was in competition for this. A guy who owns a satellite syndicated station in Europe, primarily, reached out to me and said, I love what you're doing. I want you to make a TV show for me. So
you're too busy doing TV to do a podcast right now.
Yeah, it's going to be a once a week show coming out in 2024, syndicated across his network, which is like 55 million households in 43 countries. But in America, the part that people care about is it's going to be on Amazon.
Oh, well, there you go. Now I'll be able to get it. Yeah.
So people will be able to get it. And that's called Elite Business Conversations. I named the TV show after the business. And that's what we did there.
I think that conversations, though, that's what you're really doing well on Father and Joe. And this is a basis for your business. So talk to us a little bit about this. I'm going to call it a philosophy, but I know it's deeper than that. This philosophy of conversations, especially in sales.
Mm-hmm. So the starting point of all this is I do thoroughly believe that sales will heal the world, without a doubt. All the things I went for before about government making problems worse, it's tend to what they do because they exploit them because it's easier to get elected. And what actually solves problem is I have a product that I know will make your life better, either by making your life happy or taking away a pain. And I want to get it to you. And as a result of you buying it from me, I'm going to get to other people. It's a very different sales method than the vast majority of the world uses, which I date the 1960 method. What we teach is...
Which is push it in everybody's face until you
the used car salesman. That's what I'm going against here.
Yeah.
And that's why salespeople have one of the biggest churns of any profession, despite the fact that it is the only profession that doesn't matter your starting point in this second, your race, gender, whatever, age, income level, intelligence, none of that matters. This is a profession that can make you more dollar and cent wealth than anything else. You can't make a business if you don't know how to sell. So when we start with that fact, it is the greatest opportunity, but because it's done wrong, it chews people out. That's really my starting point of the addressing. And then as far as what our business does at Elite Business Conversations is we help businesses that look around and they start feeling the constriction and the pain and the fear of not knowing where the revenue is going to come from. At Elite Business Conversations, we let business owners see that problem go away. And the next group that we help is those that are in their office and they just get the sense that no one knows what each other is doing and I don't know what they're doing. It's like we're falling into a vortex and just going down the stream, and we have no control over it. At Elite Business Conversations, not only do we give the control back, we do it in a system that's going to last well after the fact that we're gone, that is simple enough that everyone will accept, but yet detailed enough that you're not going to be able to make a mistake. And the group that I think I helped the most, that I had the most personal happiness with, is that group of business owners that just heard those first two things and they just shut down and feel regret in their heart because they don't want to rebuild the kitchen before they sell the house. They'd rather just walk away from their business and call it a day. And we say, you totally deserve to move on to the next stage in your life. Go to Hawaii, retire, start a new business, do whatever. But let's do it in a way that honors all of the sacrifice that you went through to make your business, honors your employees by you going on vacation, they don't get fired, and then also honors your customers who need what you're doing here. So that's really where we help, is basically make businesses that will last without the owner. Whether the owner is still the owner or not is not relevant. The business will live on and the sacrifices won't die in vain.
That's such a, I'm going to say that has so much anchor in your spirituality. Like I can just see the tie-in between the two things. Integrity, truth, like all of those things are still tied into the two things. So I can see why someone says, I listened to your podcast and I am going to hire you. So there is still a business correlation, whether you think of it as not. But the one thing that caught my eye when I was doing some research on you is this odd name to your book that seemed like it was incongruous with Father and Joe and with this Sales Will Heal All, which is just I love this sales will heal the world. I always think, sales cures all is something you hear more commonly, but I love the heal the world model. And so I'm excited by that. But you decided to name your book Casino Sales Master. Proven system to beat the odds in sales and in life. Tell me about why that title.
So I have been asked so many times, can you come and do this for me? And the simple fact, and this is not bragging or anything like this, I'm expensive. Our business is expensive. It's a fact of life. And I wanted to have the ability to reach out to more people. So what Casino Sales Master is actually the best way I can show not only that I did this firsthand and it works, but I did it in the hardest environment that someone can think of. Everyone listening to this knows the house always wins. The casino always wins. And everyone knows that the house edge is real. It's true. So how can you use sales skills in an environment that's supposed to make you guaranteed to fail and come out successfully? And that's what the book is. So yes, I do outline literally every step of how to make a successful sale. But that's only about half of the book. I mean, maybe it's only 40% of the book. What a great portion of it is the fact that you need to do this through personal connections and how to strengthen your personal relationships. And that is all Father and Joe. And really, if you want to be successful, and it doesn't matter what your areas of life, if you want to be a better surgeon, a better lawyer, better at sales, you fix this by making better human connections, because whatever skill you're thinking you're lacking in, when you fix your relationship skills, the rest of it turns off. And I don't just go into like gloss over, like just have a better attitude. Like I actually get into specific things to do, specific ways to carry yourself, and drills that you can do that really will enhance it. And then as I was writing the book, I realized a book is great. People will read it, but there's a much larger audience that just wants to sit down and watch it. So that's where the coaching class came from. And that's going to be just strictly video that you can, again, at Casino Sales Master, you'll be able to see the different options that you have. But it's, again, every section of the sale that we cover in the book, we do a dedicated video to that you can go through and say, hey, I want to get better training on this. I want to implement what Joe's teaching into my company. Here's a video on how to have the appropriate mindset. Here's a video on how to have my prospects never want to lie to me again. and actually have it work? How can I figure out what my prospect is, what my ideal prospect should be? And I bring this one up intentionally because I think it's the best contrast to the 19 sales method versus reality. When historically people were taught, how do I figure out what my ideal prospect is? They come up with a list of demographics. They're going to be between this age, they're going to be this gender, this race, whatever, this part of the country. And not a single part of that is true. None of that is relevant. What's relevant is, what problem do they need solved that you can do? And that's it. And once you do that mindset shift of, I don't care what they are in terms of the way they look, smell, taste, whatever. What I care is, I'm a car company. This guy needs to be able to haul a boat and my truck can do it. I don't care what he looks like. I care that I can solve his problem. Okay, well, that's a completely different mindset shift versus the way that MBAs are still taught to people now in defining their ideal prospect. And it really goes back to, I guess, the starting point of this conversation. People want the truth. And this is why, quite frankly, I'm too expensive to just be able to give information one-on-one, and why I had to make this book.
But I also think it's that you can't have a relationship with others when you don't have a relationship with yourself. And that's what I've discovered long and hard, is that my best staff, my best partners in business all come from someone who feels much more comfortable in their own skin. And that makes a huge difference. I can work with that. When they're still trying to figure that out, it's so much harder. And that's where I think Father and Joe kind of ties into that, because if we're not sitting back and reflecting, then we are never going to become comfortable with ourselves.
Oh, absolutely. We have addressed that notion a lot. I mean, it is so easy and common to just live in autopilot.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, our brains are programmed to do that for us. When's the last time you thought about breathing? When's the last time you thought about how the back of your back feels? Like that nave in your back, whatever. I don't even know what it's called. I'm trying to describe an example here. When you actually sit down and think about your processes, which we do a lot. I mean, that's a lot of what the show is in a way kind of, what am I doing and why am I doing it? How to explore myself and look at our situation through adult eyes. If I really think about this, I'm reacting this way because when I was 6, this is how I was supposed to react. Well, now that I'm adult, I shouldn't. Like, how should I do this as an adult? And actually sit back and think about things, about the way that we are, the way that we conduct ourselves. It changes everything. And it's one of these things that you don't need to do a lot. You just need to do it right. And when you do it right, it makes a massive difference. The example, this is how long we've been doing it, of defragging your computer doesn't exist in modern technology. But people understood that
That's
back
an old
in the day
school. I don't know that my kids have ever defragged anything, but I could say I have.
Exactly. But that's what we're trying to do
Right.
with our minds and our relationships. Like, this is wrong. Let's rebuild it correctly through an adult perspective.
Get rid of some of that clutter and that noise and make a straighter path. Live a life of intention, which is, I mean, whether you believe in God or not, right? Living a life of intention is why are we here, right? If not to do that. And so I think that that's really important. And I think it does have a direct relationship to whether or not you can sell. The number one thing that I've seen over the years in my business is that someone who doesn't believe in what they sell or believe that they can sell will never sell.
Oh, yeah.
It's just not going to happen, right? Like, fundamentally not going to happen.
That's exactly it. And there's lots of ways to solve that problem. But that's a fundamental fact. If you don't believe in yourself, if you don't believe in your product, you shouldn't be selling it. If you don't believe in your product, you should not be selling that product, even if you could. Because I mean, there's great salespeople that'll just move whatever just because I can make a commission on it, so I'll sell it. That's not going to help anyone in the long run. And eventually people come to that conclusion themselves. The simple fact is, we're all capable of doing it, though. I mean, we all have the basic requirements essentially from birth. We know how to communicate with people. We know how to connect with people. The problem is, so many of us throughout our journeys of life have had these skills trampled on or discouraged, and we never truly developed them successfully or the way that we would want them if we looked at ourselves objectively now. Like, I don't want to be shy where I have to hide. Yeah, I'd rather go out and talk to people, or I wish I had the ability to just tell people no sometimes and set boundaries. These are all things that get developed in us from a child, but how do we figure out how to use them in life? Because they make better adults once you figure this out, and obviously much better at sales and everything. So again, these are topics that we have discussed on the show in various formats about how to address this with ourselves, address the pains and uncomforts of our youth, and how to move forward.
I think it's so important that you're having those conversations, examining that for yourself, and that helps your audience do the same thing. And I think that that's critical in the scope of things. But you got the book, you got a coaching course, you got a TV show, you got a lot going on. So how, Joe, are you going to keep fitting in Father and Joe? Is there going to be shifts in how things are going to work? Like, what's the future for that?
Father Joe is the bedrock of what we do. I mean, that's never getting taken out or under any circumstances. Both of us are full on committed to it, and it's one of the few things in my life I don't get paid for at all, and I don't even promote any of the other stuff on there at all. I think about I did one episode when I was going to release the book because I did have to address the incongruence that you brought up in the show.
The
How can I
title,
be
yeah.
Father and Joe and have a book called Casino Salesmaster? But I don't advertise my other stuff on it. And in part because I know I'm helping people. I don't need to be selling on it. And the other reason I love doing it is because I know it's making a difference. At the end of the day, it wouldn't be growing month over month over month if people weren't getting out of it. You would get what normally happens. Oh, I watched this show for about 10 minutes. I gave it a chance for a second episode, and then I took it off my watch list. Because that's what people are. That's what we do. We've all done that on Netflix or whatever channel you're watching on. But the fact that people keep coming back and back and back, to me, is the proof, is that we're making a difference to people. Now, not all of them will send us emails and tell us what to
Do
talk
they
about. 'Cause
suggest topics, or do they ask you to talk about things?
occasionally we get them. It's certainly not the norm, but occasionally it does happen. And we bring it up as much as we can. I what I get a lot of in response was, Joe, that was something I always wondered about. Thank you for figuring out how to say what I meant.
How to ask the question, please. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that one of our most popular episodes, we nailed that on the head, which was intellectually, I can grasp the concept of God, right? But I don't feel it. Like, is there something wrong with me because of that? And that as a result has become one of our most popular episodes because again, I deal with the reality
I
of what
think
life
everyone
is.
has that thought. And
Yeah.
I mean, as I mentioned before, I went to Catholic school, but I'm a lapsed Catholic. And
Mhm.
that is exactly the thought that goes through your mind over the years. Is you like, do I find a new church in this new area or not? Like, am I feeling God? Is really what you're asking. You just don't realize you are.
Yeah. Yeah. And like being the fact that it's a Catholic show, should I feel guilty because I'm not thinking the way that this person told me when I was 4? It's like we address
Catholic
stuff
guilt
like
is
that a
heavy.
lot.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And like I said, we address that. And one of the things that just to ease people into a conversation is think of any other relationship you have in your life. When it is done correctly, both parties get something out of it. And that's never viewed as a bad thing. Your relationship with God is the same way. Yeah, sure, you don't want to be the same guy who can only ask for money and never gives anything in return, because we never like those people in our lives. But those that we have actually good relationships with, both people get something out of it. And that's the part of this that I think so many people miss when we start thinking about guilt. Like, I'm not allowed to get extra bonus good things in my life because I'm practicing a religion of love. Well, yes, you are. In fact, you're supposed to. This is called the fruits of the victory. Do it. So, now you become easier to talk to. People want to talk to you, become more confident. confidence is one of the few universal things every person on this planet finds attractive, and it just goes from there and there. And literally, I directed people to start with the virtue series. This is where a lot of them come from, and the benefits you can get and how to practice them in your life.
Well, Joe, I am so glad that you and Father Boniface brought this to the world. And I'm so glad you're committed to continuing to have this impact in the world because, as you put it, sales are going to heal the world, but so are conversations.
Mhm.
And by this podcast, I think you're not only bringing the conversation out, like actually doing it, but you're also bringing it so that I'm going to go home and talk about it. And now that's actually impacting and changing my family, and my personal revelations as well.
Mhm.
So the impact is so deep seated. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, and it's just to give people clear expectations. It's not overnight, and I give people this example. You know, if you have never run before, you're not going to wake up and run a 4.340 and beat Usain Bolt. You're going to get there gradually and keep working on it. But the joy of this, unlike things that require your body, is you can get to perfection. You can get to whatever the equivalent of the Olympic record is by working on it. And yes, some of us will do it at different paces. Some of us will have speed bursts here and there. But the point is putting in the effort and actually putting, as you said, thoughtfulness and purpose into our thoughts. Well, that's actually what makes a difference there. So I definitely thank you for having me on the program here. And is it okay if I ask you a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So we just sat here and chat for what 30, 40 minutes or so. What kind of stood out to you that you liked from this episode?
From interviewing you or from
Yeah,
your show?
from this, from
From
right here.
interviewing you? I think you're very different, Joe, than a lot of the other people that I get to interview. They have a very like straightforward business thing purpose for starting the show.
Mhm.
And your purpose was much more, I'm going to say transformational over time. That you didn't have it was to have the conversation and see what came. And I think that just has a different ruling model to it. That's an aha to me. This is a different model for podcasting. This could really work for other people. I can help them grow their shows by making them aware that this exists as an idea and
Absolutely.
in execution, right? Because you've been doing it for 340 episodes. So that to me,
Yeah.
that's what I'm always looking for in my episode here is like, how can I get to something that someone else could apply to what they're looking to do in the world? That's my whole role here and in sort of the impact that I want to have. And this is something new that hasn't been brought out before.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That nails what we're trying to do here,
Yeah.
and I think that to put one thing in it that makes it easy is I know I'm never lying, and I know like you know how you're in a conversation and somehow you think you know what you're talking about, but you realize you're kind of getting out on a limb. But I'm going to keep going that way.
I've heard people like that, definitely.
Yeah, I mean you can tell when you're talking to someone when they're
Yeah, you
there.
know it. They're like going down that rabbit hole. Yep, yep.
Yeah, those shows never last.
No, they
Because at the end of
can't.
the day, there's just so many things that the audience can tell there's insincerity. The host tells that can feel that they're doing it, and I would say this to anyone out there who's doing a show and wants to have it grow. You need to know what your system is. What are you actually talking about that can go from broad? We talk about God all the way down to 13 steps deeper. We talk about how specifically when you have this thought from your childhood that makes you feel guilty, does that make you a better person, how to deal with it and what to do about it next? And if you have a system that can go through every single step without missing a step, that anyone, whether they're in my case agnostic or Buddhist or whatever, could go through and go, okay, this makes sense, and I can see how it's beneficial. That works, and it doesn't matter what your topic is, because I have the exact same thing for my sales method I teach, the exact same thing for my culture method that I teach for businesses. The point is, when you actually know that, you have tremendous strength in knowing what you're talking about, and you never lie. Because the
Right.
number one turnoff is lying. I think that's where we're at more so than anything. And we're in a space where people, because of social media's radar, people's radar are up so much higher and more tuned than it's ever been in any generation ever. Am I actually talking to a person? Am I talking to someone who knows what they're talking about? Am I talking to someone who cares? AI can never do that, and more of our life is surrounded by AI talking to us. And we're inherently building up fences of, am I dealing with a real person or not? And should I be dealing with this person? And the more fake and insincere or insecure you are, the more you become noise that comes almost indifferential from AI. And it's just a fact of life.
It is. And I'm so glad that's what I love about podcasting. And I especially love about your show is that human connection, that human conversation, the more we elevate that, the more we're bringing great impact into the world. And so thank you, Joe, for bringing Father and Joe to the world and for bringing your business and those same business principles, tying them together. So appreciate you.
Perfect. Well, I thank you for having me and having the opportunity to talk about Father and Joe. I appreciate it a lot. Thank you.
I have so many notes from this conversation. I mean, I was thinking the whole time about, as I'm listening to Father and Joe, thinking about Socrates' message, the unexamined life is not worth living. And at the same time, I'm going through a transformational program with a group that I belong to called The Most Important Conversations. That's called Whole Life Architecture. And it's about deeply seating intention in every part of your life. So we stop consuming things without thinking about the intention and the purpose of that. And I really think the two things are tied together. So whether or not it's you're seeking out religious enlightenment, personal enlightenment, whatever it is that you're doing, there's a podcast out there for you. And people have been really devoting time and energy to creating that for you, right? I mean, 340 episodes later, there's not a topic or area or thought that they might not have covered already in this scope of things, and they're not done. So if something else is coming up next, they're going to raise that. They're going to talk about that. And, I invited them after the call. I invited Joe to think about an engagement strategy where he asks for input. And he has difficulties with scheduling because it is when you have someone who's, so busy and so famous like Father Boniface, then you have to be cognizant of their schedule and how can you fit that in. But maybe there's a way for you to submit audio questions from your audience or something where you can get outside perspectives and you can bring in and broaden it over time. And not just have it just all be about all of the two of you. Like that could be a way. So there's ideas for if you want to start here, broaden, narrow back down, do a series. There's all kinds of ideas and ways that you could do that. But here's what I know. This is why I wanted to bring Father and Joe on. I wanted to bring Joe on. He has a business, clearly has a business. And his podcast is helping him close business. It is helping him in his business because who you are in one thing is who you are everywhere. And when he's honest and truthful and introspective, he's going to make a better coach. He's going to be a better consultant for your company. He's going to be a more honest sales builder for you, right? Those things do go hand in hand. But also remember, the flip side of that is that if you're creating artifice out there, it's not going to serve your business well. That honesty, that integrity, that trust that you're building has to go through and be a continuous life for you, not just in your personal, if you're going to do a real personal show, but also in the business that you develop from it. The two things go hand in hand. And Joe Rockey is just like that. I mean, he is exactly who he said. I mean, one of the things he offered me as soon as we hung up was, how can I serve you? How can I make some more referrals for you? How can we make time to make sure we do that? That is a person who's in the world to do service. Yeah, I might be able to use his services, but it's not going to come because he pushed it on me, because he sold me. It's going to become because I enjoyed my conversation. I enjoyed my relationship, and I enjoy who he is deep inside. That's what you want to build from your show. Use podcasting to its best advantage. This is a conversation, not just with who you're talking to on the show. It's a conversation with your audience. It just happens to be one-sided because you don't hear what they have to say, but guarantee they are talking back to you, right? They are talking back in their mind. They're thinking through how they can connect with you. They're thinking through those things. So if you're not open and inviting that in concept, they're going to feel that you're talking to them. So think about it as this conversation the whole way around it. That intentional conversation is going to do you so well. And if you've been really tossing around, do I do a business podcast? Do I do a personal podcast? This is a great opportunity to look at a model that really works. Think about that. Joe never once sells anything. He once mentioned his book on the show, but he doesn't sell anything. But it does serve his business because it shows the world who he really is, what his purpose and intention in the world is, and the fact that he can stay committed to something 340 episodes in, right? So take a listen to Father and Joe. Go check out Joe Rockey. Go check it out and get on the list for his new book when it comes out. And really think about making this year the year of being really intentional and purposeful with your podcast. Thanks everyone for listening. I'm Tracy Hazzard, and I'll be back here again on The Binge Factor with another guest and another perspective on podcasting that you might not have heard before.
You've been listening to the Binge Factor podcast. For more information on podcasting and videocasting success tips and tactics, please go to thebingefactor.com. And be sure to listen to our other show for podcasters called Feed Your Brand. If you'd like to be interviewed on this show, as well as featured in Tracy's column, please go to thebingefactor.com/guest and apply.